Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio with another solo mode review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the solo mode for the Red Cathedral, coming from designers Sheila Santos and Israel Sandrero and publisher Devere Games. In the Red Cathedral, you are playing an architect tasked with building St. Basil's Cathedral. You're gathering resources using a rondel system to build these different sections, and in the solo game, you are facing off against a rival. So, let's head over to the table. I'll give you a very brief overview on how the solo game plays. Then we'll come back here and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, here we see a setup for the solo game of the Red Cathedral, and for all intents and purposes, this is just a two-player setup, although I gave my opponent a point there, which I shouldn't have. So, you are playing against a virtual opponent here, Ivan, represented by these 5 solitaire cards. Okay, the rest of the game is set up as per normal, as a two-player game. Just to give you a little bit of a view of what's out of frame, I've got the rest of the cathedral that is yet to be built up there, but for the purposes of what we're doing, most of the action is going to be focused down here, okay? Your player board is set up exactly as it is in a multiplayer game, and for the most part, the game is going to play similarly to a two-player multiplayer game. It's basically a race to building 6 cathedral cards, getting those sections of the cathedral completed, and trying to get the most points that are represented around this track. So, your turn is going to go exactly the same way as it normally would. You're going to do one of 3 things. You're essentially either going to claim a cathedral section, build sections of the cathedral, or acquire resources from the market. So let's say, for example, my first turn, I wanted to acquire a cathedral section. I would go ahead and place my banners on one of these cards that I would like to claim. For example, let's say I want to start working on this. I could take this tile and I can either place it for free face down on my board, which means that it really doesn't do anything for me, or I can pay the amount listed on the board to place it in one of these sections that are going to then do something for me on a later turn. So let's say, for example, I went ahead and put it on the 3 because this is my color here. Actually, I start with 3, so all 3 would have been spent to put that there. All right, so that's my turn. Now, for Ivan's turn, what you're going to do is you're going to look at these 5 cards that were randomly shuffled and placed in a row, and these 5 tiles that are represented with all of the 5 dice on the board, and those were also randomly placed. And you're going to start with the one leftmost that is face up. At the beginning of the game, they're all face up. So what you're going to do is here, you're going to look at the color die, and you're going to move it as if it was taking a market action. So in this case, we look at the blue die. It's got a 1 on it, which means that it's going to move 1 clockwise to this section, okay? Once that's done, you're going to pick up the dice and re-roll them. I actually got snake eyes there, all right? They're not going to gain any resources there. However, since they're in a quadrant of the board that gives them a recognition point, they're going to go ahead and take that recognition point. Then they're going to do the action that is corresponding to that die. We'll flip that over because that has already been done, and they're going to take this action, which is claiming a cathedral card. Now, at the beginning of the game, during setup, they already claimed 1 cathedral card. They're going to claim another one now. And they're going to do this in a bit of a priority order. If you, as the player, have a card that has been claimed, they're going to try to claim one right above you. And so in this case, let's scroll this up just a little bit for a moment. You see that I have this card claimed. I did that on my first turn. They're going to claim the card right above it, and they're going to take that tile out of the game, and they're actually going to get another recognition point for that, okay? So Ivan took their first turn. I would continue to take my turns, and just to kind of show you how these things work, let's say that I used the, let's say that I go ahead and I take a market action. So I want to use this, this blue die. I move this 1. There's 2 dice here. It shows 2 brick, so I multiply that. 2 times 2 is 4. I would take these 4 brick and I would place them in my inventory. You can never place more materials than you have inventory for. In this case, I opened up another one by putting one of my banners out, but there's only room for 3 more materials until I would clear out more banners. Why are you collecting these resources? You're collecting these resources because you need them to build these cathedral sections. So in this case, it shows I need 1 brick, 2 stone, and 1 purple gem, 1 jewel, okay, to complete that. And if I did, I would get a number of points and a number of rubles that are going to help me to complete further ones, kind of comboing off of each other, okay? The other thing that I could do, I should probably, did I re-roll those? I don't think I did. Re-roll those, is you can take the action of the card that's in the quadrant that you're in. And so in this case, I can take 2 equal resources and exchange them for 1 other one. So let's say maybe I want, or 4 for 2. Let's say I wanted to do that because I know I want to build this card. I only need 1 brick to do so. So maybe I would change 2 of these bricks out and get myself a purple gem, okay? Or I could have gotten a stone. So you can utilize these cards if you're in that area when you take the market action, okay? So it's going to go back and forth like that, and I'll just briefly go over what Ivan's cards do. So this is his construction card, and basically what you're going to do is any materials that are placed on this card are going to go onto the sections that they are building, all right? For the player, you have a limit of 3. You can only ever place 3 materials out at a time. Ivan doesn't have that restriction. Ivan can build as many as they've got resources, and they'll start on the leftmost bottom card, going left to right, bottom to top, and complete those cards by using the materials. And for them, materials are wild. They'll just take any materials and put them out there. They don't need to follow what the actual materials are. How do they get the materials? Well, they get the materials right here with this card, which is inventory. You take 4 materials of any type, like I just said, and you put them on the card, okay? Well, now that they're on that card, what do? Well, with this transport, you take all the materials that are on this card and you put them on to the construction card, okay? And then the next time this comes around, they're going to take those and start placing them on the cards. And then finally, you've got recognition, and Ivan's just going to gain 4 recognition points with that card. So they're going to constantly every round or every turn be either getting resources or claiming cards or getting recognition points or moving materials. It's just kind of this churning engine that they do. And they eventually will also be putting out ornamentations which give them additional points on these cards that they have been completed. Actually, they're first going to try to put them on cards that you as the player have completed, because that kind of takes away some bonuses for you. And that's really how the game's going to go. It goes back and forth, you and Ivan alternating turns. Eventually, these are all going to get flipped over, after 5 turns. And then at that point, you're going to kind of randomize them up again and put them one-on-one on the cards for the next turn, okay? And it's after these have gone through that they're going to try to put out their ornamentations. And then you'll kind of randomize these up, the tiles, and put them back out again, okay? So that's the basic overview of the game. Let's head back over and I'll give you my final thoughts. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea on how the solo game of the Red Cathedral plays out. Very similar to a 2-player multiplayer game. Not a whole lot of changes between the solo mode and the standard multiplayer version. First thing I like to do is talk about some solo benchmarks. These are items that I often consider when I'm deciding whether to get a game off the shelf or not. The first is, what is the win-loss condition? Is this a clear win-loss condition fighting against a rival, or is it a beat your high score variant? In the case of the Red Cathedral, you are facing off against a rival opponent, and I think that is the preferable way to play this game because it has a bit of a race feel. You're racing in the multiplayer game with your opponents to get 6 of those cathedral sections completed. And you certainly could have done a high score variant in this game and just had things kind of blocked from you and taken away from you. But I do like the fact that you are actually facing off against a rival opponent who's going to be getting points just like you are. Setup and teardown is another thing I like to consider, and it's a positive in the Red Cathedral. Actually, it doesn't take too much time to set the game up. I mean, there's a lot of game in a small box, so there are tokens that you have to kind of account for, and you have to get cards set up in a particular way, but you're talking 10 minutes maximum to get this game out on the table and get played, so that's not a problem for a game that gives you this amount of experience. The rules are another thing I like to discuss, and generally speaking, the rules for the game were well done. They were clear. The solo section solo rules were kept in a separate section at the end of the rule book, which is pretty typical, but it was good. It was well done. The exceptions to the multiplayer rules were clearly delineated. I didn't really feel any edge cases or confusion when reading over the rules. I had actually played the game multiplayer first, then went back and read the solo rules, and I felt like I knew exactly what I needed to do based off of that. Art and components. Well, this is a game that is in a relatively small box, and therefore everything that's within it is going to be on the smaller side. So it's a very, well, I wouldn't say very, it's a small board, main board there, but it's functional. It really only needs those 4 quadrants. It's basically a large dice kind of rondel. Very functional, plenty of space for the small mini sized cards that go in each quadrant. Actually, it takes up a little bit more table space than you might expect simply because you're building that, cathedral above it. Now, you could theoretically keep the cathedral to the side of the board and that would maybe condense your play space a little bit. But generally speaking, I think the art is fine. It's not a terribly flashy looking game, but the art that is there is nice. The iconography is, I feel, relatively strong. There were a couple of symbols that I thought were maybe a little bit ambiguous, but for the most part, the iconography is good. I felt like the wooden components were well done, and the plastic little crystals were a nice touch too. So generally speaking, I was happy with the components. The card quality was fine. The thickness of the cardboard was fine. No real complaints about the art and components. Okay, so the overall solo experience. Well, the Red Cathedral is a game that, as I may have mentioned, I played first multiplayer. And it left a nice impression on me. I really did enjoy my plays of that. And I came to the solo game later. And similar to the multiplayer game, this is a game that packs a pretty strong punch in a small package. This is a midweight Euro, and it's nice to have a game of this weight, this game length, in a smaller box. So I do appreciate that. I think that there's a good sense of pacing in the game. It still kind of keeps this kind of feel of a race that the multiplayer game does. It's one of my favorite aspects of the game, is this kind of, this perpetual feeling of, okay, I got to make sure that I'm on pace, that I'm not behind the 8 ball here, that I'm doing everything I need to do to set myself up for this game, this late game push towards getting those points. So those are things that I like. The biggest negative that I have for the solo game of the Red Cathedral is one that after the first time I played it, I thought, well, maybe this is an issue. And I wanted to see how it would come out over subsequent plays. And unfortunately, it is something that I think can affect the quality of the game. I think that what I'm getting at here is the AI cards, your rival cards, are shuffled up randomly and placed out in a line. And they're going to be in that order for the rest of the game. Now, the dice that triggers them, the color dice that triggers them, will be different. But that doesn't really matter. The fact is that depending on what order that those AI rival cards come out, that could really impact how efficient your rival opponent is at doing things. So, in other words, the first time I played the game, it just happened to be set up that the rival was getting the resources to put on their card, and then right after that transferring them to the construction card, and then right after that constructing those. So it had a really nice efficient engine that it was kind of churning through round after round, and I really felt that tension, and I was feeling like it was difficult, and I was having a hard time kind of keeping up with it. Then there were other games that I've played subsequently where the order was not as beneficial to the rival opponent, and it made it so that they were having to be a little more inefficient, and I didn't quite feel as much of a tension because I felt like I was outpacing them almost at every turn. And so that is something that I think could potentially be an issue. Now, could you just set it up so that almost of your own difficulty say, well, I know that this is what makes the AI opponent most efficient. This would be like a high difficulty. I suppose you could do that, but no, the idea that then it feels like it's playing the same way every time. So I like the randomization of it because then it's a slightly different experience. But I don't know. There's a little bit of a feeling of dissatisfaction I have with that. It was just, I felt like it could have been better if there was just a little bit of a tweak to that system, maybe changing up the the order that those came up every round. Again, I don't know how that would work balance wise. I don't even know how that would change the game mechanically. I've never tried it that way, but it is something that was kind of just sticking with me. So overall, I feel like this is a solid game, a above average solo experience that probably lost at least a point, if not a little bit more, based on that concern that I have on the order of the AI cards having too much to do with what the end result may end up being. Overall, a good solo experience. Over 7 out of 10 is what I'm giving this game. I feel like it could have been a bit higher if they had just had the better system for that AI row of cards, but overall, still one I can recommend. I don't know if it has a lot of legs. That's something I will also say that kind of played into it. I don't know how many plays of the Red Cathedral you're going to get, but 5 to 10 plays, I feel like you've got a solid game there. If you're looking for something you're going to play over and over and over again, probably not your best option. All right, that's it for me. This is Mike DiLisio signing off from Dice Tower Headquarters.